Welcome everyone to WriterSpeak, dedicated to the written word and those who produce it. I'm Jeane Slone, your host, and I am the author of 3 historical novels about women during World War II. Today in our studio, I am very happy to be talking to Charles Prickett, the author of Remembering Mississippi, Freedom Summer.
Thank you, Jeannie. I appreciate being here. Thanks for asking me.
And thank you for being able to share with us your wonderful book and the historical memoir that I really appreciate you writing so that we will not forget what happened.
It's definitely something we should not forget. And as you say, it's such a strong part of our American history. And just this past week, I've given 8 lectures in high schools, Santa Rosa Junior College, and for independent groups. And I show this movie, A Regular Bouquet, which I helped make in 1964, along with Richard Beamer, and tell about the March on Washington, the Mississippi Freedom Summer, and the Selma Montgomery March, all 3 of which I participated in or was a staff member. And I was paid, I tell people I was paid $14 a week to get shot at and firebombed. So that was, I guess, a bargain at that price.
Well, you and I both know it's so important that we do not forget the horrific parts of history so they're not repeated.
And it was a horrific part, and if I may, I'd just like to read you my brief account on the back of my book, which is available on Amazon, Remembering Mississippi Freedom Summer. And I began, the year is 1964. Imagine a country where you are a slave. You have no rights. You cannot attend public schools, the public library, restaurants, parks, churches, or movie theaters. You cannot vote or meet and organize with others like yourself who are denied these rights. That country is the United States of America and the state of Mississippi. You are black. Remembering Mississippi Freedom Summer, which is this book, is my account as a college student and civil rights activist working in the Mississippi Freedom Summer of 1964. This account explores the rural Mississippi and the black community's efforts to change the stifling and brutal system of racism that touched every life. The Mississippi Freedom Summer focused on 4 goals. First, freedom schools, which tried to fill the gaps left by a segregated educational system that denied black citizens a quality education. And I want to point out this is 10 years after a unanimous Supreme Court decided in Brown versus Board of Education that segregated education is inherently unequal in violation of the 14th Amendment to our Constitution. The second is the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party, which we organized that summer, and we tried to give a political voice to the disenfranchised black citizens. The third is black farmers were organized so they could share in federal programs that support agriculture. And finally, we had voter registration drives to try to register black citizens to vote, although this was before the Voting Rights Act of 1965, a year later, and so our results were futile. But it was a badge of honor to keep trying. And the people in the black community that I became a part of were not to be denied. And they would say, I've been denied 15 times, and by golly, next week they'll register me to vote and I'll be able to vote. So it was quite an eye-opening experience as a young college student. I was 19 and turned 20 that summer. And so this is my first-person account of that experience.
I did want to be able to tell our audience a little about your background before we get into the details. That I believe you obtained the skills of being a mechanic, a plumber, a carpenter, and a teacher during that summer. Is that correct?
Well, I certainly exhibited those skills that summer, that's for sure. That was
Yeah.
my first job teaching, and eventually I eventually earned a doctorate in education. So that was something that really helped identify and the rest of my life and what I did for a profession.
Yeah. And presently you are an attorney and a judge right here in Santa Rosa.
Well, I've been a pro tem judge for about 30 years, and actually right now I took a hiatus from being a pro tem judge, but I'm still an attorney.
I really would like to know what your parents said when you said you were going off to Mississippi from a white community in southern Illinois to become a civil rights activist.
Well, my parents were totally freaked out. And not only for me, but for my sister Kay, because we both went to Mississippi that summer. My sister was the treasurer of the local SNCC, SNCC, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. There was a chapter on almost every college campus, and she was at Southern Illinois University in Carbondale, Illinois, my hometown. Kay, my sister Kay, was the treasurer. And she went and I went, and my parents were so afraid that they would never see us again. They took out life insurance policies on both of us so they could bury us, because they thought we would never come home again except in a pine box.
Oh my.
But they were supportive. My father was, I think, largely responsible for Kay and I's attitudes about civil rights and equality and racism.
Yeah.
And they came down to visit us, both my mom and dad. And they were the only parents that I saw all summer come to a project in Mississippi to visit their children. No one else.
Which was even risky for them to do, I imagine.
It was. They had Illinois license plates, and when someone came south, they were almost always followed if they had out-of-state plates, and the same was true for my parents. They were followed. But nothing happened to them, but they certainly were brave and came to see Kay and I, thinking that maybe that's the last time they would see us.
Oh, that's really, I can just imagine as a parent. I know that I involved myself a little bit. I was in the March on Washington in 1970. I guess there were a few marches.
There have been, although
this was against the Vietnam War. And I didn't tell my parents.
Well, as a result,
I guess you had to.
well, I did. I told them. I didn't ask their permission. I just did things. You know, I think that's what a lot of young people do. And my sister and I did too. Yeah.
Well, getting back to the civil rights movement, I know that you were trained in how to become nonviolent, and they called it nonviolent training.
That's correct. Yeah, we were. The philosophy of the movement, of the civil rights movement, was really to emulate Gandhi and his philosophies and his idea of civil disobedience. If a law or a directive is immoral, you have the duty to oppose it, and oppose it nonviolently, and that's what we tried to do. We had workshops on nonviolent ways of protecting yourself. You roll up into a ball and protect your midsection, and put your hands over your head to protect, you know, your face and the back of your head, and so on. And people could wail on you and beat on you and kick you, and hopefully you could absorb those blows without serious injury. And we did the training, but it was different in practice. I mean, I was struck and wasn't seriously beaten. I still have all my teeth, and I got no broken bones, but I did get hit several times. But it wasn't bad, and it seems like, you know, everyone should try to avoid that. But when you're in that situation, there's not much you can do, and we just tried to protect ourselves from serious injury, and not strike out, not strike back. And I did my best to emulate that, although I wasn't always successful, but I certainly was angry, but I tried not to show it.
I was going to ask you if you actually had to use it, and I guess you did.
I did, although a few times I was backsliding. I remember one sheriff tried to go in the back door of our house, and it was like the fourth time they would show up at the Freedom House, which every house that civil rights workers lived in was called a Freedom House, and they would show up and run into the front of the house with their cars, a little 600-700 square foot house that would shake. It was just on piers, and then 3 or 4 cars of deputies would be following the sheriff, and they would surround the house and come inside and shove us around or punch us a few times. And after the 3rd or 4th time, I just lost my temper, and this one sheriff ran around to the back door, and I jumped up on the little stairs and shoved him down the 3 rickety stairs and told him if he wanted to visit me, he should go to the front door and knock. And he actually went around to the front, and he could have shot me right then. And that's the one time that I can remember that I really lost it, and I was just incensed at my civil rights being violated, just like everyone else was.
Mm-hmm.
And I wasn't the only person that ever did that, but that was one instance where I lost it.
So tell us, why was voting so difficult for a black in Mississippi?
Well, there were a lot of barriers for anyone black who wanted to register to vote. You had to go to the county courthouse and fill out an application before the registrar of voters, and then if you were black, you had to pass a literacy test. And the literacy tests were extremely difficult, if not impossible, to pass.
And I'd like to mention that literacy test is in the back of the book.
Yeah, I have got 3 as appendices in this book. I've got one from Mississippi, Louisiana, and Alabama.
And they are amazing to read.
And I used to, when I was lecturing in front of the history classes at the junior college, the instructor would tell the students, if you can pass this test, you get an A in the course. Well, we changed it down to where if you can get one question right, you can get an A. You can't even get one question right. These tests are just a subterfuge for preventing people to vote. And then after one of the questions, I recall Fannie Lou Hamer told me about this. She said that one of the questions says by whom you're employed, and when you put down your employer, you're fired by the time you get back home. And I actually saw that in our community in Madison County, Mississippi. The people would try to register, they would lose their job because the registrar would call their employer and say, you know, your so-and-so was down here, your sharecropper trying to register, and you better do something about it. And they did, they fired him.
So it was a very dangerous act back then for a black to even try to vote.
Yeah, and people kept trying, and they were, I couldn't believe how brave they were and determined. And I remember we would go around and try to get people to try to register, and I spoke with this one farmer. He was very successful. He had 3 tractors and farmed about 600 acres. Where I was living there, black farmers owned 60% of the farmland. So he said, well, I don't have the time right now, but I've gone before. But he asked me to wait a second. He wanted to show me something. And he went to his house, came back with a cigar box. I remember it was a Roy Tan cigar box. And he opens it up. It's full of little slips of paper. And it said, poll tax, $2, and a date on the reverse side. He said, you know, Charles, if I'm ever able to register to vote, I'll be able to vote because I've paid my poll tax over 20 years. And he had every receipt in that box. And he was determined to have his voice heard as part of our democratic system of government. And it is your voice. Your vote is your voice. And that's what we tried to do, to register people to vote and to give them a voice through the Freedom Democratic Party. And it was finally successful after Congress passed the Voting Rights Act of 1965.
The appendix I found as fascinating as the book. So in the appendix you have the the 3 sample voting literacy tests. And also, I really got so much out of reading Dr. Martin Luther King's I Have a Dream speech.
And that was an amazing speech. And the reason that I put it in here is, well, I have 2 reasons. The first is that I was there in 1963 in August, on that hot day in Washington, D.C., and I heard him give the speech. And the whole day, everyone, 500,000, 750,000 people, were all talking, relating one-on-one, not really paying attention. But King was the last speaker. When Dr. King got up to speak, it just stopped everyone in their tracks. And phrases like, I have a dream was on everyone's mind at the end of the speech, but phrases like, I have a dream one day my children will be judged by the content of their character, not by the color of their skin. And those phrases resonate today. But I also believe that that speech set the tone for the civil rights movement for the next decade. Unfortunately, King didn't make it through the next decade, but his speech is alive and well today.
Yeah, I had heard it before, but absorbing it in the written, seeing it written, was still as powerful.
It's a very powerful speech.
It is. It really is. And then in the appendix you have something also very frightening, was the declaration of a witness who participated in the murders of 3 civil rights workers.
Yes, this is a declaration of Horace Barnett given to the FBI in November of that year, and of '64. And he talks about the murders of Schwerner, Goodman, and Chaney, and how they were pulled out of their car, taken to a rural area, and shot. He describes it in such detail, and their reactions, and it's gruesome. And it's interesting because it's my understanding that he testified at the trial in Neshoba County, where the 3 civil rights workers were found, and some of the defendants included the sheriff and deputy sheriff of Neshoba County, and the jury rejected it and said, "Oh, there's not enough evidence." They didn't find murder charges against the defendants at that time. There were about 6 that were charged. They were later convicted in federal court for interfering with the civil rights of these 3 young men, and they spent the longest session that they spent was 6 years in jail. But in 2004, Richard Beamer and I went to Mississippi and showed his movie, the one that we made in '64, A Regular Bouquet. And when we were there, another defendant was tried and convicted of those murders, Reverend Killen, and he is presently serving a life sentence in Mississippi right now.
Could you tell us more about that movie?
Well, Richard Beamer, as most people don't recognize his name, but he was opposite Natalie Wood in the classic West Side Story. Oh. And he's Tony, and so my wife...
I'm very familiar with the movie, but I didn't recognize his name.
Yeah, that's who he is. He was on my project. I was a project director in the rural county of Mississippi, where I was, Madison County. The county seat is Canton, which is about 50 miles directly north of Jackson, which is right in the center of Mississippi. But Richard was on our committee, was on our staff there. He was a volunteer. He drove his car out from California. He's retained his California license plates. It was Austin Healey 3000, which I loved driving, and he seemed fine with me driving it all over the place, so I did. But at any rate, that's an aside. But Richard wanted to film what we were doing, and today, A Regular Bouquet on the outtakes is really the only film record of the Freedom Summer, of freedom schools, voter registration drives, mass meetings, all of those things. And this film is available on YouTube. If you just put in Google Mississippi Freedom Summer or that will bring you up to my, probably my website, but if you put a regular bouquet Freedom Summer, something like that, you'll see it. Click on it. It's on YouTube, and it's also on the archives of Washington University Film Archives, Washington University in St. Louis, Missouri. But it'll pop up, and you can watch the whole thing, and it's 28 minutes long, and I urge everyone to watch this movie. It's a depiction of what actually happened, and you probably will recognize some of the scenes because it's been used on the PBS documentaries such as Eyes on the Prize and several others that have been produced. I can think of 5 or 6 that have used Richard's film because it's the only film available.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you for telling our audience about being able to view this film. That will be a good educational experience for everyone.
And I urge teachers to show it in their classrooms too.
Have a lot of the schools used your book as curriculum?
They have referred to it, and every time I present at a high school, I donate books to the library and to the class. Most recently, I was at Montgomery High, mm-hmm. and I've been at Casa Grande and Petaluma and other places. Actually, one particular incident, though, stands out in my mind. I was at a 5th grade class over in Sebastopol, and the whole class stood up and recited King's I Have a Dream speech.
Oh.
So I asked people, are you smarter than a 5th grader? None of them are.
They must have had a good teacher.
They did.
Yeah. That must have been really thrilling for you to see.
Yeah, I can't recite that speech, but these kids could. Boy, and they were. I feel like the future's in good hands with these kids. And
you know, they'll remember that the rest of their lives. That's what's interesting when you are asked to memorize something when you're young. You can retain it for so long. Do you feel that your experience during Freedom Summer helped shape your life, and that's why you became an attorney?
That certainly had a lot to do with it. It certainly made me focus on education. And when I was completing doctoral work at Syracuse University, I decided to go to law school because at that time the Equal Rights Amendment for women was going from, I thought it would certainly pass. It was going from state legislature to state legislature. Finally it didn't pass. I was shocked, but I decided to focus on children's rights. And so when I came to California in '79, I was an instructor at Sonoma State. And then Prop 13 really destroyed the funding for public education. And since I had a law degree and since I got laid off from Sonoma State, I took the bar exam and passed it, and I've been a lawyer ever since. Otherwise, I would probably still be a professor of education at Sonoma State. But it made me want to gain the tools to assist people in fighting for equality, fighting for their rights. And attorneys certainly have that right, have that ability, and they have the tools to do it. And so I think I'm fortunate that Prop 13 passed and I got laid off, because otherwise I'd probably never be an attorney.
I thought that that your experience at the Freedom Summer had something to do with you being an attorney.
Well, it did, because I saw so many people being violated on their civil rights. They were unable to do things just because they were singled out because of their race. And the same thing happened to me, you know, just having our house invaded periodically by the sheriff and so on, and I didn't really know what to do at the time. I mean, I was 20 and I didn't have legal training, but I knew enough to know that the police are not supposed to do that. And then finally I learned that there are a lot of tools available to the legal profession that the police certainly should know about, but you can get redress for your grievances in the court of law, and you certainly couldn't do it locally, but you could do it in U.S. District Court, in the federal courts, and they would recognize your rights and try to compensate you for what had been taken from you, your civil rights.
Another great thing I really liked about the book are all the photographs, because when you read it, it's hard to believe that it's even true. You know, that was my experience. And the photographs are placed right in the text, instead of how photographs used to all be just placed right in the middle. And that brings a person there. As I found the back of the book brought you right to Freedom Summer. Did you actually save photographs from back then?
Well, there are like 80 photographs in this book, and most of them came from the movie A Regular Bouquet. Of course, Richard and I also, we have a couple of hours of outtakes, and the movie is 28 minutes long, so we have about 2.5, almost 3 hours of images. Some of them, the lighting was poor and things like that we couldn't use, but I was able to capture individual frames that illustrated what I was talking about. For example, we had no bathroom, we had no running water. So I built an outhouse. I have a picture of building that outhouse. I have a picture of making a shower out of a 5-gallon lard can that I actually used an actual rusty nail to punch holes in the bottom of it so the water would run out. We would draw a bucket of water out of the well and dump it in there and take a shower. We didn't have any facilities at all until I did that. And there's pictures in there of that. Those are just shows the basic living conditions were very, very different in Mississippi than most people were used to in their hometowns or at their colleges and universities. But we didn't have a flush toilet, we didn't have running water, we didn't have a telephone. We were isolated.
Yeah, it must have been like going back in time.
I'm sure it was, although all of our neighbors in the black community were just like us. So we really were living as the community lived.
Living in their time.
Living in their time, that's correct, yes.
Yeah, yeah. What an experience. Well, I just can't thank you enough for writing this book, Remembering Mississippi Freedom Summer. I personally got a lot out of reading it, as I hope everyone else continues to read it.
Well, Jeannie, thank you so much for having me on this show, and I really appreciate how you're assisting local authors and giving them a forum and promoting books such as mine, but there are many, many others, and I thank you very much for that.
And thank you once again. I would like our audience to know that Remembering Mississippi Freedom Summer is available through Amazon, also locally at Gaia's Garden in Santa Rosa, and that Charles Prickett is available for presentations. So look on the end of the credits. You will see his email and Facebook and website if you would like to have someone come for a fantastic educational experience, so we do not forget this period of time. I would like to thank our sponsors, C Media Lab in Santa Rosa and the Sonoma County Gazette. Please join us next time for another episode of WriterSpeak.